What would you do if the world looked you in the eye and told you, you don't belong here even when you had every right to be there? This is the story of a 15-year-old boy, ticket in hand, seated proudly in first class, when a crew member demanded he move for a wealthy white passenger. In that moment, everything he believed about fairness was tested. Should he quietly give up his place to avoid conflict, or should he hold his ground and risk humiliation? Because dignity is not something you surrender. It wasn't just about a seat. It was about identity, worth, and the courage to say, I belong here. And when this boy refused to move, it set off a chain of events that shook an entire airline, toppled reputations, and sparked a national conversation about respect. Now ask yourself, if it were you, or your child, sitting in that seat, what choice would you make? Stay with us as we uncover how one quiet act of resistance turned into a movement for justice and equality. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss stories that matter. The first thing Noah Ellington noticed was the taste of metal on his tongue. The second was how quiet first class became when all the noise moved inside his chest. He stood in the aisle with his wrists pinned behind him, a cold band biting skin, and watched a drop of his own blood strike his white shirt, spread, and settle like a red thumbprint. The cabin lights were warm. People did what people do when a scene breaks out at 7:43 a.m. Some stared over phone screens. Some dropped their eyes to the seatback safety card. Seat 2A sat by the window, with the wing stretched beyond it, silver and sure. In that seat, a white man in a perfect suit adjusted his cuff and took a sip of champagne. His name was Barrett Stone. He glanced at Noah the way a person glances at a weather app. Then Barrett settled and owned 2A without a word. A flight attendant with a steel nameplate stood near the galley door, one hand on a tablet. Paige Ellison. Sir, she told Noah, you are delaying the flight. We can seat you elsewhere. Please comply. Noah kept his voice level. I have a confirmed reservation for 2A. I checked in at 6 this morning. The confirmation is on my phone. He lifted the screen. His name and the QR code glowed like a promise. 2 federal air marshals moved in tight, one to his left shoulder, one to his right hip. Noah did not twist. He did not yank. He asked the way his father had taught him to ask when a rule was invoked without a reason. May I see the error in the system? Stop resisting, one marshal said, though Noah's muscles were slack and his breath was slow. When they pulled him, Noah's knee knocked the armrest and his forehead clipped a hinge. The sound was a clean click. Warmth ran along his temple and into his brow. He watched the drop when it fell and considered the line it drew across cotton. A woman in 2B held her mouth like a secret. A man in 3C angled his phone and pretended he was not recording. The cabin, a room of comfort minutes ago, was now a narrow stage. Barrett Stone set his glass down and slid fully into 2A as if obeying gravity. Noah's feet scraped the curtain threshold as they led him forward, out of the warm light into brighter air toward the door. The fabric whispered shut behind him. It would be for calling his father. Not yet. They steered him off the plane and down the jet bridge, the hollow tunnel echoing hard rubber soles. Each step felt like a notch in a ledger. Each notch said, "You do not belong where your ticket says you do." In the small security room, the lights were less kind. The table was metal. One marshal read from a form. The other sorted through Noah's wallet and boarding pass with gloved hands. "What is the source of payment for this seat?" the older one asked. "My father purchased the ticket," Noah said, in the same voice he used in class when he solved for X, and someone doubted how quickly he had arrived. The younger looked up. "And your father is Dr. Langston Ellington, Noah said. He runs AegisNet, cybersecurity. The name did not land at first. It circled the room and had to come back to be heard. The older marshal leaned his hip against the table. Phone stays with us until we finish questioning. Noah let the idea of time lengthen. He breathed. Then he said, I would like to call my father now. I need medical attention. You will receive attention when we determine you are not a threat, the younger said, and turned the page. Threat did not match Noah's posture or his bleeding eyebrow. It matched a profile someone had practiced so many times they could see it on any face they wanted. Noah looked at the camera in the top corner and found the red light. He did not want to be brave. He wanted to be exact. Please, he said, let me call my father. They gave him the phone the way a bank teller might hand you a pen on a chain. He dialed without looking. The first ring did not finish before Dr. Ellington answered. Noah kept it short. They removed me from Flight 2745, he said. NorthStar Airways. First class. My seat was 2A. There is blood. I am okay. Hand the phone to the person in charge, his father said. The marshal took it with a face that communicated a policy. The policy changed across 3 sentences. He stood straighter. He swallowed. Yes, sir, he said. Outside, a jet rotated onto the taxiway. Noah imagined the tail number. He listened to the marshal say, We will preserve the footage, and let the words anchor the floor under his shoes. He did not feel triumphant. He felt located. He felt the day slide half an inch back toward true. He closed his eyes and tasted metal. He opened them and looked at the red fingerprint on his shirt, browning edges. He thought this stain will wash out. He thought some stains stay. He thought call made. Now breathe. He did. Noah Ellington had learned long ago how to carry silence like a book balanced on his head. You kept it steady. You did not let anyone knock it loose. That morning, as he sat in the security room waiting for the next question, he thought about the words his father had repeated so often they were stitched into him like a seam. Excellence is your armor. It had started as a line Dr. Langston Ellington used in his own childhood. Growing up in the east side of Baltimore, in a row house where winter drafts slid through cracked windows, Langston would whisper it before every exam, every shift sweeping floors, every mile of paper route he pedaled through. When he finally said it to his son, Noah, the phrase no longer sounded like survival alone. It sounded like inheritance. At 15, Noah had a scholarship to Belmont Academy, a private school 30 miles from their home. Belmont was the kind of place where the grass looked clipped by rulers, where the track gleamed with new rubber, and where most students arrived in cars that cost more than the house Noah's father had grown up in. Noah had learned how to walk the halls without shrinking. Still, there were moments. A teacher once praised his essay with the preface, I wasn't expecting this from you. Noah. A classmate borrowed his notes and returned them with a smile that seemed surprised he had any. A coach asked, more than once, if he was sure he was in the right locker room. Each moment chipped at him, but he refused to turn brittle. Instead, Noah studied. He joined debate team. He practiced his presentations until every slide clicked into place, like a train on schedule. The rhythm kept him steady. When peers joked at his expense, he answered with calm precision, the same way he answered math problems, correct, without apology. At home, the Ellington house held more warmth than size. Their kitchen smelled of garlic and pepper from his father's Sunday meals. Dr. Ellington, despite being CEO of AegisNet Cyber Defense, insisted on small things, washing pans himself, folding laundry with corners aligned, making sure Noah saw that no title excused a man from work. On the nights when work didn't keep him past midnight, Langston sat across from his son at the dining table. "Excellence is your armor," he would say again, tapping a spoon against his glass. "When the world doubts you, when it strips away politeness, what will keep you standing is the undeniable," Noah asked once. "But what if even excellence isn't enough?" His father's eyes softened. "Then you stay standing anyway, because dignity is the weapon they cannot take." That conversation lingered with Noah more than any lecture at Belmont. He saw how his father, even in the highest boardrooms, wore suits not as costume but as shield. He spoke slowly when others rushed, asked questions when others boasted, and never let a slight pass without noting it in the ledger of his mind. Noah carried that image with him on the morning of Flight 2745. When they left the house at 5:15 a.m., Langston insisted on driving. The ride to Patriot Field International took 40 minutes. They spoke little. The hum of tires over asphalt filled the silence. Halfway there, Noah asked, "Do you ever get tired of being tested?" Langston glanced at the dashboard clock, 5:43 glowing blue. "Every day. But tired isn't a reason to stop. It's a reason to prepare. Excellence is your armor, but calm is your compass. Never confuse loud with strong." They pulled into the drop-off lane at Terminal C. A light rain had darkened the pavement. The airport's neon signs blinked with directions. Departures left. Parking garage right. Langston placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You know the rules. If someone raises their voice, lower yours. If someone demands proof, demand theirs too. If it ever feels too heavy, call me." Noah nodded. He wanted to say he understood, but the truth was he didn't yet. Understanding would come later, when he would hear the click of cuffs and the scrape of shoes on jet bridge carpet. For now, he only felt the pressure of his father's hand, grounding him inside the terminal. Noah followed his usual ritual. He arrived 3 hours early, checked the weight of his luggage, 38 pounds exactly, bought a 16-ounce bottle of water, and found a seat near Gate 22. He liked to watch people. The business travelers with briefcases, the families juggling strollers, the older couples moving slowly with the rhythm of routine. Observing gave him calm. It reminded him he was part of something bigger, even if that something often failed to see him clearly. He looked down at his boarding pass again. Seat 2A, printed in bold. Confirmation email still fresh on his phone. A small satisfaction swelled in him. This was not a gift. It was earned. Noah remembered the words his father had said the night before. Every seat you sit in, you earned. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. At Belmont, Noah had sometimes wondered what it would be like to simply exist without proving himself, to walk into a room and not feel the need to justify his presence. But then he thought of his father's younger days, the miles on that paper route, the cold Baltimore mornings, the endless jobs stacked until one chance opened. He thought of how Dr. Ellington had built AegisNet not from privilege, but from precision, and Noah decided he could carry the weight of proof for a while longer. As the boarding time approached, he packed his bag neatly, zipper pulled flush. He straightened his collar, adjusted his shoelaces, checked again for his ID. Each action, small but exact, was part of the armor. He did not know then how quickly the armor would be tested. For now, he only knew the lesson. Excellence is your armor. Calm is your compass. Dignity is the one possession no one could confiscate. He carried all three with him as he walked toward the gate, as the intercom announced boarding groups, as the morning sky shifted from gray to a brighter silver over the runway. By the time his row was called, Noah's pulse was steady, his shoulders squared, his steps measured. It would be seat 2A, his seat and no one, he believed in that moment, could take it away. The automatic doors of Patriot Field International opened with a sigh, and Noah Ellington stepped into a wash of light and sound. The air smelled of brewed coffee and floor polish. Departure boards glowed from 30 feet away, their letters flipping in sharp rhythm. For Noah. Being at the airport 3 hours early was not nervousness, it was preparation. He liked to arrive before the rush, before crowds pressed in, before anyone had reason to question why he was there at all. He tugged his carry-on behind him, the wheels clicking against seams in the tile. The bag was compact, 38 pounds even, because he had checked the scale twice at home. His father always said preparation was respect for yourself and for the people around you. Noah carried those words like a rhythm in his head. The terminal was already alive. A family shuffled past him, a toddler tugging at a stuffed bear with one ear nearly torn off. A group of college students, sweatshirts slung over shoulders, laughed too loudly as they debated who would sit by the window. Business travelers moved with practiced efficiency, pulling sleek black cases no wider than their hips. Noah noticed them all, but mostly he noticed how they passed through lines with barely a pause, credentials checked and waved forward like a hand over water. He joined the security line, winding between barriers of nylon strap. The announcements overhead warned about unattended baggage every 10 minutes. Noah kept his boarding pass and ID in his hand, pressed neatly together, as though alignment might make the process smoother. At the first checkpoint, the transportation security officer barely glanced at his documents before motioning him through. But then the man's expression changed. He tapped a button. "Secondary screening?" he said. "Flat." Noah swallowed, kept his tone calm. "Is there a reason? Random?" the officer said. The word landing, like a stone. Random. It was the same word he had heard at Belmont when classmates explained why they hadn't invited him to a party. Random was a lid that shut down questions. It was never random. They directed him to a separate lane. His suitcase was unzipped and unpacked. Every item was handled as if suspect textbooks, folded shirts, the phone charger he had coiled with a twist tie. When the officer lifted his headphones, black and solid with his initials engraved, Noah spoke softly. "That was a gift. My father gave me those." The officer turned them in his hands, as though weight and shape revealed hidden intentions. "We'll need to keep this for further inspection." Noah's jaw tightened, but he forced a polite nod. "How long will it take depends. You'll get it back at your destination if it clears." He wanted to protest, to ask why, but he heard his father's voice in his memory. "If someone raises their voice, lower yours. If they ask for proof, ask for theirs too. But never let anger write the words for you." So Noah simply said, "Understood," though every inch of him wanted to hold on to those headphones. They were more than plastic and metal. They were hours of music, late nights studying, the weight of a promise from his father. Now they were a casualty of procedure. By the time his bag was repacked, he felt lighter in a way that didn't feel like freedom. 1 pound missing, a hollow in the zipper pocket. He moved on, shoulders square, refusing to let the small theft ruin him. At gate 22, the boarding area was beginning to fill. Rows of chairs were dotted with passengers glued to their phones, their heads tilted like flowers toward sunlight. Noah sat near the window. Outside, the runway stretched like a gray ribbon. A plane rumbled past, its engines vibrating the glass. He found calm in watching it, measuring its slow taxi, the way it turned precisely onto the line of lights. The gate agent, a woman with neat hair pulled into a bun, glanced at his boarding pass longer than she had with the man in front of him. She frowned, typed into her computer, then lifted the phone to her ear. Minutes passed, 1, then 2, then 12. Passengers behind Noah shuffled, annoyed, though their own documents cleared in seconds. Finally, she handed his pass back with a tight smile. "You're all set." "All set," he repeated, but he heard what was unsaid. He had been checked, questioned, verified again. Not everyone needed 12 minutes to prove they belonged. When boarding was called, he waited till his group was announced. He scanned his ticket at the gate. The machine beeped green. For a moment, relief passed through him. Then he stepped down the jet bridge, feeling each vibration in the hollow metal floor as if it was testing his balance. Inside the cabin of Flight 2745, the air was cooler. First class smelled faintly of citrus and leather. The seats were wide, upholstered in gray, each one with a screen the size of a tablet tucked into the headrest. Noah found 2A. The seat looked ordinary enough, just a chair by a window. But to him, it was more than that. It was proof of something his place here, his right to sit without apology. The woman in 2B smiled gently at him. She was older, silver hair pinned back, her handbag placed neatly under the seat. "Her first time in first class?" she asked. "Yes," Noah admitted, then added with a small smile, "but not my last." She chuckled. "Don't let the seat fool you. It's still just a chair. What matters is what you do once you get where you're going." Noah nodded. Her words held truth, but he also knew the seat mattered. At least today, in this moment, it mattered. As he adjusted his bag, a flight attendant walked by. Paige Ellison. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, her stride crisp. She paused when she reached Noah, her eyes scanning his boarding pass again, though she hadn't done that with the passengers behind him. She gave a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome," she said, but her gaze lingered on him, like a note left unfinished. Noah returned her look evenly, holding the screen of his phone just in case he needed to show his confirmation again. Paige gave a brief nod and moved on, but Noah caught the subtle downturn of her lips as she passed. The boarding continued. People filled seats, stowed bags, buckled belts. Noah leaned back, closed his eyes, and breathed slowly. His father's words echoed again. Excellence is your armor. Calm is your compass. He would need both. It was still nearly 30 minutes before takeoff. Time enough for the first ripple of unease to reach him. Time enough for the quiet to grow heavy. Time enough for a man named Barrett Stone to step onto the plane. His suit sharp, his gaze set, his phone pressed to his ear as he said, "I'm boarding now. Someone's in my seat again. Fix it." Noah opened his eyes, and the day that had already pressed too hard against him began to tighten its grip. The moment Barrett Stone's polished shoes touched the carpet of first class, the atmosphere shifted. He was the kind of man who expected doors to open before he reached them, who spoke in a tone that left no room for refusal. His tie was midnight blue, perfectly knotted, his hair silver, combed so neatly it seemed carved in place. He stopped mid-aisle, surveying the cabin like a general checking his troops. Then his eyes narrowed on Noah in seat 2A. Barrett lowered his phone, but didn't end the call. He turned slightly, still speaking into the receiver. Yes, someone's in my seat. You know what to do. Fix it. Then he slipped the device into his pocket with deliberate calm, as if the outcome was already guaranteed. The flight attendant, Paige Ellison, responded instantly. Her stride lengthened, her face arranging itself into an expression of professional concern. "Mr. Stone," she said warmly, "we'll sort this out right away." Noah's pulse quickened, but his body remained still. He knew too well what was unfolding, though he prayed for once he was wrong. He pressed his palm flat against the armrest, grounding himself in the physical fact of his presence here. He belonged in 2A. He had the boarding pass. He had the right. Paige leaned slightly toward him. Her smile practiced. "Sir, there seems to be a seating error. Could I see your ticket again?" Noah handed it over without hesitation. She studied it far longer than necessary, scrolling on her tablet, her forehead wrinkling as if faced with a puzzle. Barrett shifted his weight, impatience radiating from him like static. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, though loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. "Sir," Paige said softly to Noah, "Mr. Stone is a Diamond Elite member. He always sits in 2A on this route. It's part of his profile." Noah raised his chin. His voice was steady, though inside his chest felt tight. "I checked in hours ago. The system assigned me this seat. That's not a mistake. It's confirmation." Barrett leaned closer, his shadow stretching across Noah's tray table. "Look, son," he said. The word deliberately weighted. "I've been sitting here every Monday morning for 5 years. It's practically my office. You're young. There's been a mix-up. Move along." The cabin grew quieter, passengers sensing tension but unwilling to intervene. The elderly woman in 2B shifted uncomfortably, her hands fidgeting with her pearls. Across the aisle, a man in a charcoal suit tapped his laptop but never looked up. Silence was its own choice, and most had already made it. Noah inhaled slowly. "With respect, sir, this isn't about preference. It's about fairness. My seat is here, in 2A. If the airline made an error, it shouldn't be fixed at my expense." The words carried, clear enough for others to hear. A few passengers glanced up, their expressions flickering with something between sympathy and discomfort. Paige's smile faltered, her tone sharpened. "Young man, it's important you follow crew instructions. Delaying a flight is a federal issue." Noah heard the shift. He recognized it. The script had begun where calm assertion would be painted as defiance, where dignity became disruption. He remembered his father's advice. Always demand evidence. Never accept authority without proof. He leaned slightly forward. "Then show me the duplicate booking. Show me the system log. If you want me to move, I want evidence." Paige exchanged a look with another attendant, a man with a square jaw and name tag reading Michael Hensley. Irritation sparked in both their eyes. "That information is confidential," Michael said briskly. "You'll need to gather your belongings and come with us." Barrett folded his arms, lips curling into a smirk. "See? Even they agree. Let's not make this harder than it has to be." Noah's throat tightened, but his words came measured. "It already is harder than it has to be. Because the truth is simple. I belong in this seat." Barrett's voice rose. "This is absurd. You're just a kid. You don't even look like you belong in first class. Stop wasting everyone's time." The sting of those words landed deep, but Noah refused to flinch. His father had prepared him for this, for the subtle daggers wrapped in politeness, and the blatant ones flung without shame. He kept his spine straight. "I do belong here, and I'm not moving." The silence broke with Page pressing the overhead call button. A chime echoed, sharp in the cabin. Within moments, 2 men emerged from the rear air marshals, their presence heavy with authority. They moved with a confidence that suggested outcomes were predetermined. Page pointed at Noah. "This passenger is refusing to comply with crew instructions. He's becoming disruptive." Noah's chest tightened. He lifted his phone, thumb hovering over his father's contact. "I just want to make a call before you phones off now," Page snapped, lunging slightly forward as if to snatch it. The marshals closed in. One reached for Noah's arm. "Stand up, sir." Noah resisted only with words. "Please verify my ticket first. That's all I ask. Verify the record." But they didn't pause. Hands gripped his shoulders, his arms, firm and unyielding. As they pulled, his head caught the edge of the armrest. Pain burst white-hot across his temple. Gas rippled through the cabin. Someone whispered, "He's bleeding." The world tilted, sound narrowing into fragments. "Stop resisting," one marshal barked, though Noah hadn't moved against them. The accusation echoed, ready to overwrite the truth. Barrett slid smoothly into 2A as Noah was dragged down the aisle. He adjusted his cufflinks as though nothing unusual had occurred. A smear of blood glistened faintly on the carpet near his feet. Passengers recorded on their phones. Others looked away, their eyes fixed on screens, on windows, on anything but the sight of a teenager in handcuffs, his shirt blooming red at the collar. Through the haze of humiliation, Noah held one thought steady. "Call Dad." His phone was gone, taken by the marshals, but his mind repeated it like a drum. "Call Dad. They don't know who they're dealing with." By the time they shoved him into a windowless room with gray walls and a blinking security camera, Noah's wrists were raw, his forehead throbbing, blood traced down his cheek. The officers ignored it. "Possible fraudulent ticket," one said. "Possible aggression toward crew," added another. Noah's voice cut through, low but unwavering. "That's not the truth, and the truth will come out." He closed his eyes briefly, steadying his breath. His father had always said calm was the most dangerous weapon, and in that moment, bruised but unbroken, Noah believed it. The metal chair was cold beneath Noah as the cuffs dug into his wrists. The room had no windows, only a single red light blinking above the corner camera. 2 airport security officers leaned against the wall, their arms crossed, while the marshals sat opposite him at a steel table. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and something older like dust trapped in vents. "State your name," one marshal demanded, his voice flat, as if the boy in front of him were just another case file. "Noah Ellington," he answered calmly. His voice wavered only slightly, steadied by his father's words that lived inside him. "Excellence is your armor, calm is your compass, and your reason for attempting to occupy a first-class seat." Noah's forehead ached where the gash bled sluggishly under the makeshift tissue pad. Attempting his voice carried a quiet fire. "I wasn't attempting anything. I was assigned that seat. Tour, my boarding pass, my confirmation code. They're all in your evidence bag." The marshal smirked. "Or maybe it was a fraudulent purchase. Happens more often than you'd think." The younger security officer chuckled. "Kid's what, 15? Looks more like someone sneaking in than someone who belongs." Their words pressed against Noah, sharp and dismissive, but he sat straighter. His father had taught him to let silence do the work sometimes, to show strength without raising volume. After a pause long enough to make them shift uneasily, Noah spoke. "My father purchased the ticket. He is Dr. Langston Ellington, CEO of AegisNet Cyber Defense." for a beat. The room stilled. One of the officers exchanged a skeptical look with the other. AegisNet, he asked, his tone shifting just slightly. The government contractor. Yes, Noah said firmly. The older marshal scoffed. Name-dropping won't help you. You resisted removal. That's all that matters here. Noah's voice cut sharper now, though never raised. I didn't resist. I asked for proof. You can check the cameras. You'll see the truth. And if you keep me here bleeding while ignoring that evidence, then you're part of the lie. The men shifted, their confidence loosening just enough for Noah to seize the moment. He leaned forward, his wrists scraping against steel. One phone call. That's all I ask. One call to my father. If I'm lying, you'll know. If I'm not, then you'll wish you hadn't tried to bury the truth. Silence fell again. The senior officer exhaled, pinched his nose, then slid the phone across the table. One call. Make it quick. Noah's fingers shook as he dialed. The first ring felt like an eternity, the second like a lifeline. Then came his father's voice, low and steady. Noah. The sound cracked something inside him. For the first time since the boarding gate, Noah felt the edge of fear soften. Dad, he whispered, his throat raw. They dragged me off the plane. They said my ticket was fake. I'm bleeding. They won't listen. There was a sharp inhale on the other end, followed by silence so profound Noah could almost feel his father's focus sharpening like a blade. When Langston Ellington spoke again, his voice carried the kind of calm that made grown men tremble. Put one of them on the phone. Now. The officer hesitated, then took the device with a dismissive snort. This is airport security. His expression shifted within seconds. His spine straightened. His voice lost its edge. Yes, sir. Of course, sir. We'll review the footage immediately. I assure you, yes. Dr. Ellington. I understand. He swallowed, handed the phone back with trembling fingers. The room's atmosphere had changed in an instant, as if the walls themselves recognized the weight of the name now pressing down on them. Noah listened as his father's voice came steady through the receiver. Hold your head high, son. They're scrambling now. Don't let them break your calm. I'm already moving. Justice is coming. The line clicked off, but the echo of those words stayed with him. Within minutes, the cuffs were removed. The officers brought a first aid kit, clumsily pressing a butterfly bandage to his forehead. Sorry about the misunderstanding, one muttered, though the word sorry sounded hollow, like cardboard scraping stone. They tried to cover themselves with phrases like standard procedure and necessary caution. Noah stayed quiet, rubbing his wrists, watching them stumble over apologies. He didn't need to argue. His father was already rewriting the script. By the time they escorted him to the airport's VIP lounge, the incident had already begun to ripple beyond the walls. Passengers' videos were circulating online, clips of him being pulled, of his blood, of Barrett Stone settling into the stolen seat. On screens throughout the terminal, headlines scrolled, "Teen removed from flight," amidst dispute over first-class seat. In the lounge, the furniture was leather, the lighting warm, the silence expensive. But Noah felt none of the comfort. His wound throbbed with every heartbeat, and the taste of humiliation lingered bitter on his tongue. Two airline representatives arrived, one a woman in a tailored Navy suit with a practiced smile, the other a man clutching a legal pad as if it might shield him. "Mr. Ellington," the woman began, her tone dripping with scripted sincerity. "On behalf of NorthStar Airways, I want to extend our deepest apologies for the inconvenience today. We'd like to offer you a year of complimentary upgrades and a generous travel credit as a gesture of goodwill. Noah's eyes narrowed. Where are the crew who lied about me? Where's the man who demanded my seat? The lawyer shifted uneasily. The flight has already departed, but rest assured, we're conducting an internal review. These matters are delicate. His phone buzzed. Notifications lit the screen. Justice for Noah trending. Classmates sending shock and outrage. Strangers posting words of support. Videos of the incident were gathering millions of views. Noah looked up, voice low but unshaken. You're not worried about me. You're worried about the cameras, about your stock. The woman's smile faltered. We simply want to make this right. You can't buy right. Noah cut in. Not with credits, not with upgrades. Justice isn't on your menu. They stiffened, unaccustomed to resistance from someone his age. But Noah wasn't just any teenager. He was Langston Ellington's son, and in a matter of hours, his father would arrive not just as a parent, but as a force no airline could ignore. In that lounge, as executives whispered into phones and screens showed the stock dipping by the minute, Noah understood something he had only guessed before. This wasn't just about his seat. It wasn't even about this flight. It was about every person who had ever been told, "You don't belong here." And tonight, for once, someone powerful enough to change the story was on his side. By the time Dr. Langston Ellington's car pulled up to the private entry at Patriot Field International, the sun had shifted high, pouring glassy light across the parking structure. He stepped out in a tailored gray suit, not hurried, but with a presence that bent the pace of everyone around him. Security staff moved quickly, one holding open the sliding glass doors, another murmuring into a radio as though simply announcing that Langston Ellington was on the premises was enough to rearrange the order of the day. Inside the VIP lounge, Noah sat hunched in a leather chair, his shirt stained with dried blood, his bandaged forehead pulling tight when he shifted. He looked small for the first time in years, his frame curled inward. But when his father entered, Noah straightened as if pulled up by invisible string. Their eyes met, and for a moment the chaos of the day shrank into something simple: father and son. Langston crossed the room, not rushing, each step deliberate. He placed a hand on Noah's shoulder. His touch was firm, grounding. "You're safe now," he said softly. "I've got you." Noah exhaled, the tension in his chest loosening for the first time since the cuffs had clicked shut. "Dad, they dragged me. They said my seat was fake. They let that man take it." Langston's jaw tightened, though his voice stayed level. "I saw the footage. Son, everyone has. It's already out there. Behind them." The two airline representatives scrambled to their feet. The woman in navy tried to reclaim control of the room. "Dr. Ellington, we were just explaining to your son that NorthStar Airways deeply regrets." Langston lifted a hand, not rudely, but with authority that silenced her mid-sentence. He turned his gaze on her, steady and unflinching. "You dragged my son, bloodied him, and stripped him of dignity he earned. And now you want to talk about regrets." The lawyer fumbled his legal pad, flipping pages as though a contract might shield him. "We are prepared to discuss compensation and goodwill measures." Langston's voice sharpened, but never rose. "Compensation is for inconvenience. This was assault. This was systemic bias coded into your so-called loyalty profiles. And the world is watching." The representatives shifted uncomfortably. They were used to complaints, even lawsuits. But what they faced now wasn't anger. It was precision. Langston was a man who built firewalls for nations. He did not shout. He dismantled. He turned to Noah. kneeling slightly so they were eye to eye. "Tell me everything. From the moment you arrived at security." Noah did. He recounted the random screening, the confiscated headphones, the 12-minute delay at the gate, the confrontation with Paige Ellison and Barrett Stone, the marshals dragging him, the cut on his head. His voice faltered only once. When he said, "He told me I didn't look like I belonged." Langston's hand tightened on his shoulder. When Noah finished, silence pooled in the room. Then Langston stood, pulling his phone from his jacket. His fingers moved quickly, sending encrypted messages, opening channels only a few in the country could access. Within minutes, NorthStar's CEO was on the line, his voice spilling from the speaker. "Dr. Ellington, please, this is a misunderstanding. We value your family, your partnership." Langston cut him off. "You value my infrastructure. Without AegisNet, your planes don't fly, your data doesn't move, your transactions don't clear. And yet, you let my son bleed in your custody. You let your crew humiliate him while your loyalty profiles favored an executive who assumed he owned a seat. Tell me, do you understand the weight of that hypocrisy?" The CEO stammered. "We will suspend the crew immediately. We'll issue a public apology. Whatever you need." "What I need," Langston said, his voice like steel under velvet, "is reform, not just firing scapegoats. I want your loyalty algorithms audited, your training protocols dismantled and rebuilt, your leadership held accountable. This doesn't stop at one crew. It stops at the system that allowed it." The line was silent for a long beat. Then the CEO's resigned sigh came through. "We'll begin immediately. I'll convene the board." Langston ended the call without farewell. He turned to the airline representatives in the lounge. "You'll arrange medical care for my son. Not in your clinic, at Johns Hopkins, with my chosen physicians, and you'll cover every cost. You'll preserve all footage, every log entry, every internal communication from today. If anything disappears, I'll assume it was destroyed, and your liability will triple." They nodded frantically, scribbling notes. Langston faced Noah again, his voice softening. "You see, sun calm is your compass. You kept your dignity when they tried to strip it. That's why we're here now, not just to punish them, but to change them." Noah swallowed hard, emotions warring in him. Shame, anger, relief, and something larger responsibility. He whispered, "I didn't want to be the example." Langston's gaze gentled. "None of us do. But sometimes we are chosen by the moment, and you met it with strength." As the night fell and headlines multiplied, the world debated the boy in seat 2A. Some called it a tragedy, others a turning point. Hashtags swelled, "War Seat 2A." "Justice for Noah." "War Flying While Black." Clips were dissected on news panels, in classrooms, in barber shops, and in a quiet hotel room near the airport. Noah sat with his father, his bandage replaced, his phone buzzing endlessly. He muted it. The noise of the world could wait. For now, he needed to breathe, to rest in the rare calm that came when his father was near. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. What had started as a seat dispute was becoming something much larger. A reckoning not just for NorthStar Airways, but for every system that had ever whispered to him and others like him. "You don't belong here." Noah closed his eyes. He could still feel the cold cuffs, the sting of humiliation. But he also felt his father's words echoing like armor against the dark. "You belong everywhere your ticket takes you," Langston had said. And now, the world would be forced to listen. Morning broke over the city with headlines already glowing across every screen. News anchors spoke Noah Ellington's name with the gravity of a verdict. Talk shows played the grainy cell phone clips again and again. A 15-year-old boy, calm but firm, refusing to leave his rightful seat. Two marshals dragging him down the aisle, a smear of blood against his shirt. By 7, mem. Hashtags surged across social platforms. Justice for Noah. Seat 2A, and flying while black. The comments came from every corner of the country. Parents wrote of their fear that this could have been their child. Former flight attendants described patterns of quiet discrimination in their own careers. A civil rights attorney posted, "This is not a mistake. It is a system." And the system just bled a child for daring to sit where his ticket placed him, in the Ellington Hotel suite. The curtains were drawn against the chaos outside. Noah sat at the small dining table, scrolling through the avalanche of posts until his father gently took the phone from his hands. "Enough for now," Langston said. "Let them talk. You need to breathe." Noah rubbed the bandage on his forehead, feeling the tenderness beneath. "It's like the whole world is watching me bleed." Langston's gaze softened. "No, they're watching you stand. That's the difference." A knock sounded at the door. When Langston opened it, 3 reporters stood with cameras ready, escorted by hotel security who apologized profusely for failing to keep the floor private. Langston's expression alone was enough to send them retreating. He closed the door gently but firmly, then turned back to his son. "This is no longer about us," he said. "It's about everyone who's ever been told they don't belong where they've earned the right to be. Which means we must handle it with care." Later that morning, NorthStar Airways held a press conference. The CEO appeared on a stage lined with their logo, his smile thin, his voice rehearsed. "We regret the incident involving Mr. Noah Ellington. We are conducting a thorough investigation, and we are committed to ensuring equity and dignity for all passengers." But within minutes, the public knew the statement was hollow. Reporters asked about loyalty profiles that gave preference to elite members like Barrett Stone. The CEO deflected. They asked about the decision to remove Noah rather than verify his boarding pass. The CEO stumbled. They asked if crew members Paige Ellison and Michael Hensley had been suspended. The CEO offered only, "We are reviewing." Clips of his evasion spread just as quickly as the videos of Noah. A headline on one network read, "NorthStar flies into turbulence, PR disaster unfolds." Another ran with "From seat 2A to Congress calls for oversight after teen dragged off flight." Meanwhile, in boardrooms far from cameras, Langston's calls carried heavier weight. He spoke with members of the airline's board, government transportation officials, and leaders of advocacy groups. His demands were precise and independent audit of NorthStar's policies, suspension of all crew involved, and a public acknowledgement not of a misunderstanding, but of systemic bias. For Noah, the hours passed in a blur. He watched news panels argue over his story. Some voices tried to shift blame, suggesting he should have complied, that he escalated the situation. But the video showed otherwise. His calm, his steady insistence, his simple request for proof they spoke louder than any smear. Messages poured in from classmates at Belmont Academy. Some expressed outrage. Others offered quiet solidarity. One read, "I never realized how much you carried until now." Another simply said, "Proud of you, Noah." Yet he felt conflicted. He hadn't asked to be a symbol. He hadn't wanted his pain to become everyone's talking point. He told his father, "I don't want to be just a headline. I don't want people to remember me as the boy who bled on a plane." Langston listened, then placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Then don't let them. Use this moment to speak. Show them who you are beyond that aisle." That evening, Langston arranged a live interview with a respected journalist known for fairness. In the studio, the lights were bright, but the atmosphere was calm. Noah sat beside his father, the bandage still visible, but his posture steady. The journalist asked, "Noah, when they told you to give up your seat, what went through your mind?" Noah spoke slowly, choosing each word with care, that I had done everything right. I arrived early, I checked in, I had my ticket, and still, it wasn't enough. I thought, if I move, it means they win not just over me, but over everyone who's told they don't belong. So I stayed. The interviewer leaned forward, and when they dragged you, Noah's eyes darkened, but his voice didn't shake. I thought of my dad. I thought of how he taught me calm is stronger than anger. And I thought, someday, they'll see this for what it is. I just didn't know the whole world would. The segment aired nationwide. People saw not only the videos of violence, but the poise of the boy who endured it. They heard his words and felt the resonance of a truth too many knew firsthand. In the days that followed, pressure mounted, shareholders threatened to withdraw. Activists staged protests at major airports, carrying signs with slogans like "Every seat earned" and "We belong in 2A2." Politicians called for hearings on discrimination in air travel, and within NorthStar, panic grew. Internal emails leaked, revealing discussions about high-value passengers like Barrett Stone being prioritized. Training manuals surfaced, showing subtle language that encouraged staff to make judgment calls about who looked like they belonged in premium cabins. For Noah, each revelation was both vindication and burden. He was right, but being right had cost him his peace. He sat one night by the hotel window, watching planes lift into the dark sky, their lights blinking steady. "Dad," he whispered, "what if I'm not strong enough to carry this?" Langston joined him, their reflections side by side in the glass. "Strength isn't about carrying everything alone," he said softly. "It's about knowing when to lean on those who love you. And son, you don't carry this for yourself anymore. You carry it for change, and that is always heavier. But together, we can hold it." Outside, a plane lifted higher, its engines cutting through the night. Inside, Noah breathed deep, feeling the weight but also the possibility. The world was watching, and this time, it wouldn't look away. By the third day, NorthStar Airways was no longer a company, but a crisis. Markets opened with their stock plunging 9% before lunch. The clips of Noah being dragged had been replayed so many times that they no longer needed captions. Everyone knew the boy's name, the seat number, the blood on his collar. In boardrooms, investors shouted about liability. In airports, passengers refused to board NorthStar flights, demanding refunds on the spot. Inside the Ellington suite, the atmosphere was both calm and charged. Langston's phone rang every hour, not just with journalists, but with senators, transportation regulators, even executives from rival airlines offering support. Noah watched from the couch, his textbooks unopened beside him. He tried to focus on homework, but the noise of the world bled into every corner. He scrolled past yet another article headline. Teen's ordeal sparks federal probe into airline discrimination. His photo appeared everywhere, his bandaged forehead, his solemn eyes. Strangers wrote essays about him as though they knew him. Some called him a hero, others a victim, still others a symbol. He wasn't sure which felt heavier. At breakfast, he pushed scrambled eggs around his plate without eating. Langston noticed. "Food is fuel," he said gently, the way he always did. I'm not hungry, Noah murmured. Then, after a pause, Dad, what if this gets bigger than us? What if it changes everything? And I can't keep up. Langston set his fork down. His voice was steady, deliberate. It's already bigger than us. That's the point. You don't have to carry it all. You just have to stand in the truth. Let others carry the rest. Noah wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at him. He replayed the moment over and over, the marshal's grip, the sharp crack of his head against the armrest, the sudden cold when the cuffs closed. He thought about how quickly he had become a hashtag. People were chanting his name outside NorthStar's headquarters while he sat in pajamas at a hotel table. Just a boy with a math test due next week. That afternoon, Langston convened a private meeting with NorthStar's top board members, conducted via encrypted conference call. Noah sat off to the side, listening. One board member stammered excuses. We can't suspend the entire crew without due process. Langston's interruption was calm but unyielding. Due process. My son was denied due process when your staff chose loyalty tiers over human dignity. You don't get to hide behind bureaucracy now. Another tried to placate. We're drafting a revised training protocol. Sensitivity sessions. Cultural bias modules. Langston leaned forward, his tone cutting. Sensitivity doesn't heal bruises. Modules don't erase bloodstains. You want credibility, fire the entire crew, today, and announce it publicly. Anything less is just theater. The line went quiet. Board members exchanged glances, though unseen, their silence thick with fear. They knew AegisNet ran security frameworks their company depended on. They knew Langston could dismantle them without raising his voice. Finally, the chairman spoke. We'll make the announcement within 24 hours. Noah felt a jolt at those words. Entire crew fired. It was a decision bigger than he had expected. He wondered about Paige Ellison, her clipped professionalism, the smirk on Michael Hensley's face. He wondered if they would regret, if they would learn, or if they would simply move to another job and carry the same shadows. That evening, the news broke NorthStar fires entire crew of Flight 245. The headline scrolled across every major network. Reporters dissected the unprecedented move. Some praised the decision as accountability. Others criticized it as appeasement. Outside the Ellington Hotel, protesters cheered. Chants of Seat 2A belongs to all of us rose into the night. Inside, Noah sat by the window, staring at the city lights. He whispered, almost to himself, I didn't want them fired. I just wanted them to see me. Langston heard. He walked over, rested a hand on his son's shoulder. Sometimes accountability looks like punishment. Sometimes it looks like change. The challenge is making sure it doesn't stop with the first. Noah nodded, but stayed quiet, conflict twisting inside him. Part of him felt vindicated justice had moved swiftly, for once. Another part felt uneasy. He thought of Paige's eyes when she realized she might lose control of the situation, of Michael's practiced authority. He thought of Barrett Stone, still untouched, still flying, still expecting doors to open for him. Why just the crew, Noah asked finally. Why not him? Langston's gaze sharpened. His day will come, but for now, the system that enabled him is what matters. Cut the roots, not just the fruit. As the night deepened, Noah lay in bed, unable to sleep. His phone buzzed with messages from classmates, strangers, activists. Some called him a warrior. Others begged him to speak at rallies. He turned the device face down, the glow spilling against the sheets. In the quiet, he wrestled with his own thoughts. Was he brave, or just caught in a storm? Did he stand because he chose to, or because he had no other option? Was he strong, or just stubborn in a moment that spiraled beyond him? He pressed his palms together, breathing slowly, the way his father had taught him. Calm is your compass, but even compasses spin in storms. By dawn, the city outside hummed with new protests, new debates, new headlines. NorthStar's stock plummeted further. Politicians announced hearings. Advocacy groups prepared lawsuits. The crew of Flight 2745 disappeared into silence, their careers erased in a single decision, and in a hotel room high above it all, Noah Ellington sat with his father, staring at the glow of another sunrise. The world was changing because of him, but whether that change healed or scarred, he could not yet tell. While the crew of Flight 2745 were being escorted off payrolls and into silence, Barrett Stone was having dinner at a private club on Fifth Avenue. He sat in a dark leather booth, swirling bourbon in a crystal glass, while his companions leaned in close to hear his version of the story. "They overreacted," Barrett said, voice steady with the practiced tone of a man who had lived his life unchallenged. "The boy was in my seat. Everyone knows 2A is mine. Monday mornings, New York to D.C. That's my commute. Loyalty status guarantees it." One of his colleagues chuckled. "And now look, whole airline's on fire." Barrett smirked, lifting his glass, because a kid didn't know when to move. He should be thanking me for teaching him a lesson. But outside the polished walls of the club, the world was watching with different eyes. News outlets had begun digging deeper into Barrett's history. Journalists unearthed old complaints from other passengers, allegations of preferential treatment, of upgrades granted without cause, of incidents where he had displaced others from their seats with nothing more than a raised eyebrow and a frequent flyer profile. By the following morning, Barrett's name trended alongside Noah's. Hashtags emerged: Moore, Barrett's seat, privilege in the sky, no for all. When confronted by reporters outside his office building, Barrett's smirk cracked just slightly. "I had no control over airline procedures," he insisted, his cufflinks flashing as he gestured. "I didn't drag anyone. That was security. But the public had already decided." To them, he was the embodiment of entitlement, the man who believed his money and status made him owner of a seat purchased by someone else. In the Ellington suite, Noah watched the coverage with mixed feelings. Why are they only looking at him now? Everyone knew what he did in the moment. They only care because it went viral. Langston nodded slowly. "That's how it works. Son, injustice ignored in silence becomes outrage when captured on camera. People need to see to believe, even when the truth has been spoken for years." Noah leaned back against the couch, eyes heavy. "I don't want this to be about him. I don't want it to turn into just one villain's face. It's bigger than that." "You're right," Langston said. "But sometimes one face becomes the symbol people latch onto. If the system doesn't reform, removing him means nothing. Our work is to make sure this doesn't end with Barrett Stone." That night, Langston met privately with federal officials in Washington. Noah didn't attend, but he overheard his father's side of the call. Calm, precise, but edged with iron. "You cannot allow this to be handled as a PR stunt," Langston said into the secure line. "If NorthStar fires a few employees and calls it fixed, then nothing changes. I want congressional hearings. I want accountability written into regulation. This is not about one airline. This is about an industry pattern, an algorithm of exclusion disguised as loyalty." When the call ended, Langston found Noah awake, staring out the window again. The boy's voice was quiet, almost uncertain. "Dad, what if it never changes? What if all this noise just fades? And next month, someone else gets dragged. For being in a seat they paid for, Langston crossed the room, standing behind his son, his reflection tall and steady in the glass. Change is never instant. It's pressure. It's persistence. You've lit a fuse that won't go out. Whether it explodes into reform or burns quietly into memory depends on how we hold it. Noah turned, searching his father's face. And if I can't hold it, Langston rested a hand on his shoulder, then you lean on me. And when I falter, we lean on the world that's rising with us. This isn't yours alone anymore. Meanwhile, NorthStar's leadership was in freefall. Leaked emails revealed frantic exchanges between executives, discussions about Barrett's high-value status, notes about prioritizing white male frequent flyers, fears of shareholder lawsuits. Every revelation poured gasoline on the fire. In airports across the country, travelers staged sit-ins at NorthStar counters. Signs read, "We are all Noah." Pilots began releasing statements through their union, condemning the treatment of passengers and demanding systemic reform. Even rival airlines seized the moment. Advertising campaigns that promised every seat earned and no passenger left behind. Barrett Stone, once untouchable, now found himself surrounded by cameras every time he left his office. His company's stock dipped as clients distanced themselves. Former colleagues whispered about his arrogance, his sense of entitlement. He remained defiant in public, but in private, cracks began to show. At a late-night dinner, he confided to a friend, "This isn't about me. This is bigger than me. They're tearing me down to prove a point." And for once, he was right. Because by then, Noah's name was being spoken not just on television, but in congressional halls. Lawmakers cited his case as the spark for hearings on racial bias in air travel. Advocacy groups filed lawsuits demanding transparency in how airlines assigned seats, enforced rules, and treated passengers. Noah listened to all of it with a strange mix of pride and unease. He had wanted dignity. He had wanted justice. Now, he was the centerpiece of a storm that threatened to rewrite the rules of an entire industry. Late one night, lying in the quiet of the hotel room, he whispered to himself, "I just wanted them to see me." But the truth was, now the whole world did, 2 weeks after the nightmarish flight. Noah Ellington found himself standing on the marble steps of Capitol Hill. His wound had healed into a faint scar just above his eyebrow, but the memory of being dragged, humiliated, and left bleeding was still raw. The building loomed behind him like a monument to justice, but Noah wasn't sure yet if it would be his ally or another wall built to keep voices like his out. Cameras flashed as reporters crowded the barricades. Their questions swirled together, indistinguishable until one pierced the air. "Noah, are you ready to testify against NorthStar?" He froze, clutching the strap of his backpack. For a heartbeat, he wasn't the boy at the center of a national firestorm. He was just a student, barely 16, trying to balance calculus homework and coding projects. But then his father's hand rested on his shoulder. Langston's touch was grounding, the way it had been when Noah took his first steps years ago, when he stumbled, when he doubted. "Yes," Noah said simply, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm ready. Inside." The hearing room was thick with tension. Lawmakers sat in semicircle rows, their expressions alternating between curiosity and calculation. The nameplates in front of them glinted under the bright lights. A large crowd filled the public gallery. Journalists, activists, airline executives, even rival carriers eager to witness NorthStar's reckoning. The first to speak was Senator Marjorie Blackwell, chair of the Transportation Committee. Her voice was calm but firm. "Today, we examine an incident that has shaken public trust in our airlines. The treatment of Noah Ellington is not isolated. It represents a pattern too many Americans, particularly Black Americans, have endured in silence. She gestured toward Noah. Mr. Ellington, thank you for your courage in joining us. Noah adjusted the microphone, heart hammering. He remembered his father's advice. Speak truth, not performance. I bought my ticket, Noah began, his voice quiet at first but growing stronger. My father gave it to me as a gift, a chance to represent my school at a technology conference. I followed every rule, checked in early, showed my ID, and sat where I was assigned. But the airline didn't see a young scholar. They saw a young black boy who didn't belong in first class. Gas rippled through the room. Noah paused, letting the silence stretch, then continued. I was asked to move. I refused because I had every right to be there. They called me disruptive. Air marshals dragged me out in front of everyone. I was bleeding when I left that plane. And the man who wanted my seat, he took it. Noah swallowed, holding back the anger that still simmered beneath his ribs. This isn't just about me. If my dad weren't who he is, I'd still be labeled the problem. There are thousands of others like me who don't get a microphone, who don't get hearings. They just disappear into silence. The room erupted in murmurs. Some lawmakers scribbled notes. Others exchanged looks heavy with discomfort. Langston leaned forward, his deep baritone filling the chamber when it was his turn. My son is not an isolated case. Through AegisNet's data analysis, we uncovered a pattern black passengers flagged for random checks at rates 17 times higher than white passengers. Frequent flyer programs that favor white businessmen disproportionately. Training manuals with coded language that instruct staff to double verify non-traditional profiles in premium cabins. These aren't mistakes. They are systems designed to preserve privilege and disguise exclusion as policy. Screens behind them lit up with data charts and anonymized testimonies from other passengers. Faces blurred, voices altered. But the stories echoed Noah's denied seats, forced delays, unjust removals. Senator Blackwell leaned forward. Mr. Ellington, are you suggesting these policies are intentional discrimination? Langston met her gaze evenly. I'm saying when a system produces the same biased outcome over and over, intention becomes irrelevant. The effect is discrimination, and the responsibility is yours to confront. In the gallery, Barrett's tone shifted uncomfortably. He had been subpoenaed to appear, but his lawyer sat protectively at his side. For once, the swagger in his eyes was gone. The questioning stretched for hours. Senators grilled NorthStar executives who attempted polished apologies, deflecting with promises of ongoing training and policy reviews. But Langston dismantled each excuse with receipts, emails, memos, videos, algorithms. By the end, the executives looked like men drowning in evidence they couldn't refute. When Noah was dismissed from the witness table, applause erupted in the gallery. It wasn't standard protocol, but no one stopped it. Activists chanted his name. Journalists swarmed the hallway. Noah ducked his head, overwhelmed. But Langston whispered, "Breathe, son. This is bigger than us now." That night, back in the hotel, Noah curled up by the window, watching headlights snake across the city. His phone buzzed endlessly with messages of support. Yet beneath the noise, an ache lingered. He spoke without turning. "Dad, what if I'm just a symbol? What if people don't actually care about me? Only the fight I represent?" Langston set aside his laptop and joined him by the glass. Symbols change the world. Noah, but you're more than a symbol. You're my son. You're a boy who loves code, who sketches robots in the margins of his notes, who still asks too many questions at dinner. Don't let them take that from you. Be the symbol, but never forget the soul. Noah leaned against him, silent, letting the words sink in. The hearings continued for days, and each session brought new revelations. Leaked documents showed how NorthStar staff had been incentivized with bonuses for maintaining VIP loyalty satisfaction scores. In practice, it meant prioritizing wealthy white frequent flyers over anyone else. Training sessions even used coded slides, profile management for optimal experience. The translation was clear: decide who looked like they belonged. The public outrage swelled. Demonstrations erupted outside NorthStar headquarters. Celebrities tweeted Noah's name. Churches held vigils, praying not just for him, but for every anonymous traveler silenced by prejudice. Meanwhile, Barrett Stone's life unraveled further. Anonymous recordings leaked of him mocking passengers and bragging about his influence. Clients severed ties. His own board questioned his judgment. Alone in his penthouse, he stared out at the city with a glass of untouched whiskey, muttering, "It was just a seat, but deep down, he knew it had never been about the seat. It was about the entitlement he had worn like armor his entire life, now stripped bare. For Noah, the days blurred into a whirlwind of cameras, interviews, and testimonies. Yet in quiet moments, he still carried the scar above his eyebrow, a reminder that change came at a cost. One evening, he scribbled in his journal, "I don't want to be famous for my pain. I want to be remembered for making it mean something." Langston read it over his shoulder and smiled faintly. "That's exactly why you will." The hearings had barely concluded when a new storm broke loose. It started with whispers, anonymous blogs posting claims that Noah Ellington had a history of disciplinary issues at school, that his scholarship at Belmont Academy was in jeopardy, that he had been coached by his powerful father to exaggerate the airline incident. At first, they looked like ordinary trolls, but the precision of the timing, the sudden amplification across networks, and the coordinated hashtags suggested otherwise. Langston recognized the fingerprints immediately. Late one night, he stood at the head of the hotel's makeshift war room. His team clustered around glowing screens. "This isn't random. It's a disinformation campaign," he said, his voice cold. "The goal is clear: discredit my son, undermine his testimony, and bury the systemic evidence we presented." Noah sat at the edge of the room, fists balled tightly in his lap. "They're calling me a liar. They're saying I made it up for attention. Dad, what if people believe them?" Langston crouched in front of him, meeting his eyes. "Listen to me. Smears are the last defense of the guilty. They're trying to rewrite your truth because they can't erase the evidence, but will answer with facts. The facts came quickly." AegisNet's cyber unit traced the campaign to a shadow PR firm contracted by one of Barrett Stone's allies. Funding was funneled through shell companies. Bot networks amplified the falsehoods, recycling the same lies with minor variations. Screenshots were compiled, IP addresses tracked, payments traced. But while Langston built the counterattack, Noah wrestled with the human side of it. Classmates texted him with awkward sympathy. Some teachers pulled him aside with concerned expressions, asking if he was holding up under the pressure. Strangers sent him both messages of support and venomous threats. One evening, scrolling through the barrage, Noah whispered, "I don't know if I can keep being the kid they fight over. I'm not a headline. I'm just me." Langston put an arm around him. "And just you is enough. That's what they're afraid of." The smear campaign reached a fever pitch when a talk show host invited Paige Ellison, the former flight attendant, to give her side of the story. Seated beneath soft lighting, Paige wiped away performative tears. "I never wanted any harm to come to him," she said, voice trembling. But he was uncooperative. He made the other passengers uncomfortable. I did what I thought was right to keep order. The sympathetic host leaned in. "Do you feel you've been unfairly attacked?" Paige nodded. "Yes. I've lost my job, my career, and all for doing my duty." Clips of the interview circulated, and suddenly the narrative shifted for some. Commentators on certain networks painted Paige as the victim of cancel culture, punished for enforcing rules. Noah watched the segment on a tablet, heart pounding. His voice cracked as he turned to his father. "She's lying. She knows she's lying. And people believe her." Langston didn't flinch. "Then we remind them of the truth." The reminder came the next morning, when AegisNet released authenticated messages from Paige's phone messages she had exchanged with Barrett Stone minutes before Noah was removed. "He's in your seat. Don't worry. We'll fix it." Another read, "These kids always try to get special treatment. I'll handle it." The release detonated across media. Whatever sympathy Paige had earned evaporated instantly. Networks replayed the messages alongside her televised tears, exposing the duplicity. For the first time, the tide shifted from doubt back to outrage. But the campaign had left scars. Noah scrolled through hundreds of hateful comments saved in screenshots, words etched into his mind. He looked at his father across the room. "What if this never ends? What if they keep coming until I break Langston?" Crossed the room slowly, his movements deliberate, and placed both hands on Noah's shoulders. "Then you hold on to what they can't touch: your dignity, your truth. Remember, the smear fades, the scar remains, but scars mean you survived." While they spoke, NorthStar's board held an emergency meeting. Executives whispered about shareholder revolts, reputational collapse, and mass boycotts. For the first time, even the most entrenched leaders admitted survival required more than PR spin. They needed reform. They needed to cut ties with Barrett, with Paige, with every shadow that tied them to discrimination. But Barrett wasn't finished. From his penthouse office, he called old allies, threatening lawsuits, leveraging decades of influence. "They can't erase me. I built my seat at 2A. If I go down, I'll drag NorthStar with me." Yet even he could feel the silence closing in. Clients stopped answering his calls. Partners withdrew. His smirk, the mask of power he'd always worn, was beginning to crack. Noah didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. Instead, one night, staring at the city skyline, he murmured to his father, "I don't want to destroy them, Dad. I just want to make sure no kid like me ever feels that small again." Langston's reply was quiet, almost a whisper. "And that's why we're going to win." The boardroom of NorthStar Airways was a glass fortress 40 floors above the city. On that morning, storm clouds pressed against the windows, turning the skyline gray. Inside, the company's top executives sat in silence, their faces pale, their suits immaculate but heavy with fear. At the head of the long mahogany table sat the chairman, Richard Halstead, hands clasped, eyes flicking between stacks of reports no one dared to read aloud. The agenda was simple, but brutal survival. The airline was bleeding millions by the day. Stockholders demanded resignations. Politicians were calling for oversight committees. Protesters camped outside terminals, chanting Noah Ellington's name. And in the background, Langston Ellington's voice loomed over every conversation, calm, implacable, unstoppable. "We have to cut ties with Barrett Stone," one board member finally said, his voice cracking. "He's toxic. Every day his name trends. We sink deeper. But Barrett has powerful allies. Another countered, he built our VIP loyalty model. If we sever him, we'll alienate half our high-value clients. A woman at the far end of the table slammed her pen down. We're already alienating the rest of the country. Look at the numbers. 90% of new bookings are vanishing. No one trusts us. Either we reform or we collapse. The chairman's gaze shifted toward the windows, where a helicopter buzzed through low clouds. And what does reform mean? Fire a crew, replace a few managers, issue a glossy campaign. His voice was bitter. We tried that. It's not enough. The room fell into uneasy quiet until a younger executive, his tie loosened, spoke with unguarded honesty. Reform means we dismantle the very system we built, the tiers, the hidden algorithms, the profile judgments. We stop rewarding entitlement and start respecting every passenger. That's what the Ellingtons are forcing us toward. Silence deepened. Some executives looked away. Unwilling to admit what they had long known, the system worked exactly as intended. Meanwhile, in the Ellington Hotel suite, Noah scrolled through live streams of the protests outside NorthStar's headquarters. He saw hand-painted signs reading, "We are 2A in every seat, every soul." He read posts from strangers who shared their own humiliations being bumped for less qualified passengers, questioned about their IDs, stared at like intruders in cabins they had every right to sit in. "I didn't know it was this bad," Noah murmured, setting the phone down. His hands trembled with the weight of so many voices. Langston, pacing the room with a headset, caught the words. He muted his call and turned to his son. "That's the truth. Noah, you were the spark, but this fire was waiting for air. Now it's out in the open." Later that day, Langston walked into the same glass fortress of NorthStar's boardroom, escorted by a federal mediator. The executives looked at him like a force of nature they could not contain. He did not sit immediately. Instead, he placed a folder on the table and let the silence stretch. "This," Langston said, opening the folder, "is a comprehensive record of your discriminatory policies, internal memos, loyalty program analytics, staff training modules. My team has documented every detail. We've shared copies with congressional investigators and the Department of Transportation." One executive bristled. "You're trying to destroy us." Langston's eyes held steady. "No, I'm trying to rebuild you before you collapse under your own weight." He slid another document across the table. "Here are my terms. Immediate resignation of senior leadership complicit in these policies. Dissolution of your current loyalty tier system. Establishment of an independent passenger equity board with enforcement power. Public acknowledgement that discrimination was not an accident, but a systemic choice." The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Angry, panicked. One man shouted, "You can't dictate terms to us." Another hissed, "This is blackmail." Langston waited, hands folded, until the noise died down. Then he spoke in a voice so calm it silenced the room. "It's not blackmail. It's leverage. The truth is already out there. You can resist and watch your airline die in disgrace, or you can accept change and salvage what's left. The choice is yours." The chairman exhaled heavily, rubbing his temples. "And if we refuse," Langston leaned forward slightly, his voice low but sharp, "then AegisNet withdraws its cybersecurity infrastructure from your fleet tomorrow. Your operations will grind to a halt within hours. And when passengers ask why, I'll tell them the truth." The boardroom froze. They knew it wasn't an empty threat. Langston controlled systems they depended on to keep flights in the air, data secure, schedules functional. He had the power to ground their entire airline with a single call. At last, Richard Halstead spoke, his voice heavy with defeat. "We'll consider your terms." Langston straightened, gathering the folder. "You don't have time to consider. The world is watching. Decide before the markets open tomorrow." He left the room in silence, the storm outside reflecting the storm within. Back at the hotel, Noah sat with a sketchpad in his lap, doodling quietly. Langston entered, shoulders taut, but softened at the sight of his son. "What are you drawing?" he asked. Noah turned the pad around. On the page was a simple airplane, but instead of numbers on the seats, he had drawn common names, every kind. Maria, David, Hassan, Chloe, Jamal. He had written across the top, "All seats earned, all faces welcome." Langston's throat tightened. He sat beside his son and placed an arm around him. "That's what this fight is for," he whispered. And outside, as the rain streaked the windows, the world held its breath for what NorthStar would do next. The next morning, markets opened with brutal speed. NorthStar Airways stock plunged another 15% in the first hour. News anchors spoke of a free fall, analysts warned of bankruptcy, and passengers flooded social media with screenshots of canceled reservations. Protesters stood outside terminals with bullhorns, chanting Noah's name alongside demands for justice. In the glass fortress of NorthStar's headquarters, Richard Halstead called the board into emergency session. Executives arrived pale, rumpled, some with ties missing, others with sleepless eyes. The air was thick with the smell of panic. "This is unsustainable," one of them blurted out, before Halstead even opened the meeting. "We've lost nearly $1 billion in market value in a week. If we don't announce sweeping changes today, regulators will come for us, shareholders will revolt, and we won't have an airline left to defend." Another, older board member slammed his hand on the table. "We can't just bow to the Ellingtons. They're holding us hostage. It sets a precedent." The younger executive who had spoken candidly days earlier leaned forward, his voice steady despite the chaos. "It's not hostage-taking when you're being forced to stop discriminating. What precedent are we worried about being fair?" The room bristled. For decades, NorthStar had built its empire on catering to men like Barrett Stone, the elite few whose money spoke louder than anyone else's dignity. Now that empire was crumbling, brick by brick, under the weight of public outrage. Halstead rubbed his temples. "We either reform or we collapse. Those are the choices." He turned to the general counsel. "Draft the resignations, mine included." Gas filled the room, but Halstead's eyes were tired. "We cannot pretend anymore. We've been exposed. Better to step down with some measure of control and be dragged out in disgrace." At that moment, Barrett Stone burst through the doors uninvited, his suit wrinkled, his cufflinks crooked. He looked less like the untouchable titan he once was, and more like a man cornered by his own hubris. "You're all cowards," Barrett spat, his voice shaking with rage. "This airline belongs to me as much as it does to you. I built your VIP network. I brought in the clients who kept you afloat. And now you're going to throw me under the bus because of one spoiled boy." The younger executive stood. "That spoiled boy has done more for this country in 2 weeks than you have in your whole career. He told the truth. You bought silence with your status, and now it's gone." Barrett's face reddened. "You'll regret this, all of you." But the room no longer bent to his will. For the first time in years, Barrett Stone's words fell flat. Security was called, and as he was escorted out, Reporters waiting in the lobby captured his furious exit. The images circulated within minutes bear it. Once the embodiment of wealth and privilege, now reduced to a man shouting at doors that no longer opened for him. Meanwhile, in their hotel suite, Noah and Langston watched the news unfold. Noah sat cross-legged on the bed, remote in hand, eyes wide. "They're actually doing it," he whispered. "They're stepping down." Langston remained cautious, arms folded. "They're protecting themselves. Don't mistake survival tactics for morality. But it's a start." Noah looked down at the scar above his eyebrow, touching it absent-mindedly. "It feels strange, like I should be happy, but all I feel is tired." Langston sat beside him, his tone gentler now. "That's what change feels like at first. Heavy, because you know it came with a cost. But son, what you've done here, it's going to outlive the tiredness. It's going to outlive both of us." Later that afternoon, a press conference was held outside NorthStar headquarters. Cameras crowded the plaza. Executives filed out, their faces pale, their statements rehearsed. Richard Halstead stepped to the podium, his resignation letter in hand. Effective immediately, he announced, "NorthStar Airways will begin a restructuring process. Senior leadership, myself included, will step aside to allow for independent oversight. We recognize that our policies have failed to protect the dignity of our passengers, particularly communities of color. We accept responsibility for systemic discrimination within our organization, and we commit to rebuilding this airline on principles of equity, transparency, and respect." The words echoed through the plaza, through television screens, through phones held by millions across the country. For some, it was vindication. For others, it was too little, too late. Noah, watching from the hotel room, felt his chest tighten. He had dreamed of hearing an airline admit the truth, but he never imagined it would happen because of him. The phone buzzed beside him with a message from one of his classmates. "You changed everything. We're proud of you." He set the phone down and whispered, "I didn't change everything. I just refused to move." Langston, standing by the window, turned. And sometimes, refusing to move is the most powerful action of all. That night, father and son walked quietly through the streets of the city. Protesters still filled the squares, their chants echoing into the night sky. But when people recognized Noah, they didn't swarm him. They simply nodded, some pressing their hands to their hearts. It was respect, not spectacle. Noah met his father's eyes, his voice soft. "Maybe it's not about fighting them forever. Maybe it's about showing people we can stand still and still matter." Langston nodded, a faint smile breaking through his stoic exterior. Exactly. Stillness is its own kind of strength. Above them, an airplane roared across the night sky, its lights blinking steady. Noah tilted his head up, following its path until it vanished into darkness. For the first time since the incident, he didn't flinch at the sight of a plane. He felt, just for a moment, a fragile sense of peace. The old order was collapsing. Something new, uncertain but full of possibility, was beginning to take shape. For a few days after NorthStar's public collapse, the city seemed to exhale. Protesters who had camped outside terminals went home, still watchful but no longer chanting into the night. News anchors began talking less about crisis and more about reform, speculating whether the airline could survive its self-inflicted wound. Yet inside the Ellington suite, the quiet felt heavier than the storm. Noah sat curled on the sofa, his sketch pad open but untouched. The scar above his eyebrow had healed into a faint mark, But the memory of metal cuffs and blood on his shirt still lived just beneath his skin. His name was still trending, but the world's attention was slowly moving on to the next outrage, the next scandal. Langston noticed the shift in his son's eyes. He set down his laptop, crossed the room, and sat beside him. "What's on your mind?" Noah stared at the blank page. "Everyone keeps saying we won. That NorthStar fell because of me. But I don't feel like I won anything. I feel like I lost something I can't get back." Langston waited before answering, his voice soft. "You lost innocence. That's what injustice steals first. But you gained something to perspective. Strength. Purpose. Those don't always feel like victories. Sometimes they feel like scars." Noah closed the sketch pad, his voice low. "I just wanted to be seen, not turned into a symbol, not turned into someone people argue about on TV." "Symbols are heavy," Langston said, "but you're still you. You're still the boy who codes late at night, who doodles robots when he should be studying. Don't let them take that." The following week, invitations poured in. Civil rights groups asked Noah to speak at rallies. Schools across the country wanted him to share his story with students. A university extended an honorary scholarship. Journalists begged for exclusives, but Noah felt torn. Part of him wanted to retreat, to go back to quiet mornings with homework and music. Another part understood that stepping back might make his voice fade, leaving the system unchanged. One evening, as he paced the hotel balcony, he confessed, "I don't know if I'm strong enough to keep going. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I disappoint everyone who believes in me?" Langston joined him, leaning against the railing. The city stretched beneath them, restless and alive. Strength isn't about never doubting. Noah, it's about speaking even when your voice shakes. People don't need you perfect. They need you honest. Days later, Noah agreed to one event, a televised town hall on airline discrimination. The studio was packed with families, activists, and former flight attendants. The moderator began with pointed questions for the NorthStar interim leadership, who offered polished promises of reform. But when the camera turned to Noah, the room fell silent. He spoke slowly, deliberately. "I was dragged off a plane because someone decided I didn't look like I belonged in the seat I paid for. That seat was more than a number. It was dignity. It was proof that I deserved to be there, just like anyone else. When they took it away, they weren't just moving me. They were saying kids like me don't belong. That's what has to change." The audience erupted in applause, some standing, some wiping tears. Noah lowered his gaze, cheeks flushed, but he didn't back away. He had found his voice again, not as a symbol, but as himself. Meanwhile, Barrett Stone's fall accelerated. More leaked footage surfaced, showing years of arrogance and entitlement. Clients severed ties. His name, once synonymous with success, became shorthand for privilege. He tried to fight back with lawsuits, but judges dismissed them one after another. Alone in his penthouse, he looked out over the city he once commanded, muttering, "It was just a seat. Just a seat." But deep down, he knew it had never been about the seat. It had been about power he no longer held. Back in the Ellington suite, Noah sat with Langston late into the night, both of them staring out at planes cutting through the sky. "Do you think it'll really change?" Dad Noah asked. "Or will it just go back to the way it was?" Once the noise dies down, Langston took a long breath before answering. "Change is slow, sometimes painfully so. But this what you did put a crack in the wall. Cracks spread. Someday the whole wall falls. That's how progress works. Not in leaps, but in persistence. Noah nodded, though doubt still lingered. He thought of the scar above his eyebrow, of Paige's false tears, of Barrett's sneer. He thought of chants echoing in the streets, of signs declaring, "We are 2A." He thought of how one stubborn moment refusing to move had unraveled an empire. He closed his eyes, whispering, "Maybe that's enough for now." Langston placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "It's more than enough, and it's only the beginning." The night stretched quiet, but in that silence, Noah felt something shift. Not victory, not closure, but the fragile weight of change settling in a burden. Yes, but also a promise. Spring edged into the city with restless warmth. Trees along the avenues broke into pale blossoms, and for the first time in months, Noah Ellington felt air that didn't smell like hotels or hearings. He walked through the park with his backpack slung over one shoulder, trying to remember what it felt like to be just a student. People still recognized him. A mother paused with her stroller, whispering, "Thank you." A group of college students waved, holding out a phone for a photo. Noah smiled politely, but inside he wrestled with the strangeness of it. Every nod, every glance, was a reminder of the day he refused to move from seat 2A. At Belmont Academy, the whispers were louder than before. Some classmates looked at him with admiration, others with unease. Teachers tiptoed around him, unsure whether to treat him as the same boy they'd taught for years, or as the young man who had testified before Congress. During lunch, his friend Jalen leaned across the table. "You know you're in the history books already, right? Our kids are going to study you one day." Noah rolled his eyes. "I just didn't move seats. Jalen." "Yeah," Jalen said, grinning. "And that's why it matters." Yet not everyone saw it that way. Flyers appeared on lockers, printed anonymously. Noah Ellington Attention Seeker. Rumors swirled that he had only stood his ground because he knew his father was powerful enough to back him up. Noah ripped one flyer down and stuffed it in his bag, his jaw tight. That evening, he told his father, "They think I did it because of you. They think I was brave only because I knew you'd protect me." Langston listened carefully before answering. "Let them think what they want. The truth is simpler. You refused because you knew you belonged. That had nothing to do with me. Don't let them rewrite your courage." But Noah couldn't shake the sting of the whispers. He began sketching again, late at night, filling his pad with airplanes that had open cabins, no first class, no separation. He wrote in the margins, "What if we rebuilt it all differently?" Meanwhile, NorthStar, under interim leadership, announced sweeping reforms. Loyalty tiers were suspended. Independent oversight boards were created. Diversity and equity officers were installed across every terminal. Publicly, they framed it as transformation. Privately, insiders admitted it was survival. Media outlets shifted focus, calling the reforms the Ellington effect. Editorials debated whether one boy's refusal had permanently altered air travel. Some praised it as a turning point. Others dismissed it as temporary noise. Noah, watching from the quiet of his room, muttered, "I don't want an effect. I want change that sticks." One weekend, Langston surprised him with a trip, not a conference, not a hearing, but a simple train ride to their hometown. The rhythm of the rails was steady, grounding. They passed fields, small towns, and stations that smelled of coffee and iron. On the ride, Langston asked, "What do you see when you think of the future?" Noah stared out the window. A world where kids don't have to prove they belong in a seat they paid for. A world where I don't have to be a symbol for something that should be normal. He hesitated, then added, and maybe a world where I can just be me." Langston nodded slowly. "Then that's the world we'll keep building, piece by piece." When they arrived, old neighbors greeted them warmly. At the corner store, the owner pressed a hand to Noah's shoulder. "My grandson talks about you every day," he said. "He tells me, 'Grandpa, if Noah can stand his ground, maybe I can too.'" Noah blinked hard, his chest tight with emotion. Later that night, lying in his childhood bed, he realized that while the city painted him as a symbol, here he was, simply Noah, someone's son, someone's neighbor, someone's inspiration, even if he didn't feel ready for it. Back in the city, Barrett Stone's decline reached its bitter end. Once a man of influence, he now faced federal investigation into his business dealings. The same arrogance that made him untouchable now left him isolated. Former allies avoided him. Former friends crossed the street to dodge his gaze. He sat alone in his penthouse, staring at a boarding pass he had kept from years of flights, whispering to himself, "Seat 2A was mine." But even he knew it was gone. Meanwhile, Noah found himself invited to a youth summit on equity and justice. The stage lights reminded him of the hearings, but the audience was different students, teachers, young activists. When he took the microphone, he hesitated, then spoke with the honesty that had carried him this far. "I didn't plan to become a story," he began. "I didn't want to be a headline. I just wanted to sit where I belonged. But that moment showed me something. Sometimes refusing to move is enough to move the world. Not because you're trying to be a hero, but because you're saying, 'I matter. We all matter.' That's what this fight is about." The room erupted in cheers, but Noah stayed quiet afterward, his hands trembling slightly. He knew he wasn't done wrestling with the weight of it all, but he also knew that his voice had power to shape not just an airline, but the way people thought about dignity itself. Later, as he and his father walked back to the hotel, Langston draped an arm across his shoulders. "You're finding your way," he said softly, "and you're doing it your way. That's the only path worth taking." Noah didn't answer at first. He just looked up at the night sky, where a plane traced a glowing path across the stars. This time, he didn't see the cuffs or the blood. He saw possibility. He saw the echo of a moment that had changed him, and through him, had begun to change the world. The courthouse was packed long before dawn. News vans crowded the street. Cameras aimed at the stone steps like vultures waiting for the first glimpse of movement. Inside, the marble floors echoed with hurried footsteps, reporters whispering into microphones, families clutching each other's hands tightly. Everyone knew this trial wasn't just about one boy and one seat. It was about the nation's conscience. Noah Ellington adjusted his tie nervously as he sat beside his father in the courtroom. He wasn't supposed to testify again, but the lawyers warned him that his presence alone carried weight. His father, Dr. Langston Ellington, rested a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "Just remember," he whispered, "we don't need to prove your worth. We only need to show the truth." Across the aisle sat Barrett Stone, the once influential businessman whose arrogance had set everything in motion. He no longer looked untouchable. His expensive suit couldn't hide the slump in his posture or the dark circles beneath his eyes. His lawyers shuffled papers nervously, aware that the public had already judged their client guilty of entitlement and prejudice. The judge entered, and silence swept the room. Opening statements began with a sharp edge. The prosecution laid out the events a teenage boy forced from his seat, the violent mishandling by crew and marshals, the systemic policies that had allowed profiling to persist. They didn't call it an accident. They called it a pattern that finally had a name and a face. The defense tried to paint a different picture. Barrett Stone was merely a loyal customer, they argued, who had been promised certain privileges. The crew acted under pressure, following airline protocols. Noah, they implied, might have misunderstood, but each attempt to soften the story only tightened the noose around them. The videos were undeniable, Noah bleeding, Stone sliding into the seat with a smirk, the flight attendant, Paige Ellison, whispering instructions to the marshals. When the first witnesses took the stand, passengers from Flight 2745, the truth sharpened. A college student testified that Noah had remained calm and respectful throughout. A businesswoman recounted how she saw Paige nod to Stone before the marshals arrived. Each account chipped away at the carefully constructed defense. Then came Noah's turn. He walked slowly to the witness stand, his palms damp. The courtroom hushed, every camera lens focusing on him. He took the oath, then sat down, looking smaller than the enormity of the case surrounding him. The prosecutor asked softly, "Noah, can you tell us what happened that day in your own words?" Noah's voice trembled at first, but steadied as he spoke. "I had a confirmed seat in first class. I showed my ticket. I followed every instruction. But I was told to move. Not because of a mistake, because someone else thought I didn't belong there." He paused, looking directly at Stone, whose gaze flickered away. "And when I said no, they treated me like a criminal. I wasn't resisting. I was just sitting where I had every right to be." The defense attorney rose, ready to cross-examine. He asked pointed questions. "Isn't it true you were nervous when asked to move? Could your behavior have been interpreted as defiant? Did you perhaps overreact because of your age?" Noah held his ground. "Being nervous isn't a crime. Wanting to keep my seat isn't defiance. Overreacting, sir. I left that plane in handcuffs with blood on my face. If that's not overreaction, I don't know what is." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Even the judge's gavel couldn't suppress it fully. When Noah stepped down, Langston caught his eye and gave the smallest nod of pride. The boy who had once wondered if he only had courage because of his father had now shown the world his own strength. Outside the courtroom, the nation followed every word. Hashtags surged again. Wow, seat 2A. Real justice for Noah. Will Ellington effect? Talk shows debated not just the trial, but the larger question how much of America's infrastructure quietly assumed who belonged where airlines rushed to issue statements distancing themselves from NorthStar, promising independent reviews and reforms of their own. Inside, the trial stretched for weeks. Expert witnesses testified about racial bias in customer service algorithms. Whistleblowers revealed memos encouraging profile checks for certain passengers. Former crew members admitted privately that complaints against Paige Ellison had been buried for years. Each revelation felt like a stone added to the weight pressing on the defense. When Barrett Stone finally took the stand, his downfall was complete. He tried to frame himself as the victim of public hysteria, claiming his only concern was punctual travel. But the prosecution played his recovered text messages aloud. "Get that boy out of my seat. I don't care how." Gas filled the courtroom. Stone's voice broke as he stammered explanations, but the words hung in the air like poison. Langston watched in silence, his jaw tight. He didn't feel triumph. He felt sorrow that his son's pain had to be broadcast for the world to see, that only public shame could move a system to accountability. When closing arguments arrived, the prosecution spoke with quiet gravity. "This isn't just about a boy in a seat. It's about a system that too often decides who belongs by the color of their skin. Today, you can decide if that system remains hidden or if, finally, it is held accountable. The defense, weary and cornered, spoke briefly about procedures, misunderstandings, the need for leniency, but their words felt empty. The jury deliberated only a few hours before returning. Guilty on multiple counts, unlawful removal, endangerment of a minor, violation of passenger rights. For Barrett Stone, additional civil suits loomed. For NorthStar, regulatory agencies prepared sanctions and sweeping oversight. As the verdict was read, Noah sat still, breathing slowly. The weight he had carried for months shifted slightly, not gone, but lighter. Langston squeezed his hand. "You did it," he whispered. Noah shook his head. "We did it, but it's not over. Not until the next kid doesn't have to go through this." That night, outside the courthouse, the crowd cheered as the Ellingtons emerged. Microphones were thrust toward them, but Langston spoke only once. This was never about power or status. This was about dignity. Let today remind us all every seat belongs to every person who has earned it, no matter who they are. And for the first time since that terrible day, Noah smiled without hesitation. Months passed after the verdict, yet the echoes of Flight 2745 still rippled across the country. Airports felt different, now subtle, but unmistakable. Announcements carried new emphasis on fairness. Posters declared every passenger matters. At terminals, travelers whispered about the Ellington case, the way earlier generations whispered about landmark civil rights rulings. For Noah Ellington, the shift was both overwhelming and grounding. He could no longer step into an airport without recognition. Some passengers approached him with gratitude. Others watched quietly, as if studying living proof that one small refusal could alter an industry. Noah smiled politely, but inside he was still learning how to live with the weight of being a symbol. He walked into Belmont Academy one crisp autumn morning, notebook under his arm. The hallways, once echoing with dismissive whispers, now hummed with a cautious respect. The flyers calling him an attention seeker had vanished. Instead, a new student club had painted a mural in the cafeteria, bright skies, open seats, and the words, "Dignity takes flight." Noah had been asked to sign his name at the bottom. At first, he hesitated. "I don't want this to just be about me," he told his friend Jalen. "It isn't," Jalen replied, grinning. "It's about what you stood for. Your name is just the reminder." Noah picked up the brush and signed quietly, his hand steady. For the first time, he didn't feel like an outsider at school. Meanwhile, Dr. Langston Ellington's influence grew in unexpected ways. As CEO of AegisNet Cyber Defense, he was invited to consult with federal agencies on bias in security systems. His testimony about algorithmic discrimination, once dismissed as abstract, was now seen as urgent. Langston spoke calmly, but with conviction. Technology is only as fair as the humans who build it. If we don't train our systems to see dignity, they'll repeat the same prejudice we're trying to escape. Legislation soon followed regulations requiring airlines to audit algorithms, oversight committees to review complaints, and transparency about passenger treatment. Analysts called it the most significant reform in air travel in decades. To Langston, it was only the beginning. One afternoon, Noah and his father visited NorthStar's training academy. The airline, under new leadership, had invited them to speak with recruits. The room was filled with young attendants, their uniforms crisp, their notebooks open. Noah stood at the front, his voice soft at first, but clear. I was 15 when I was told I didn't belong in a seat my father bought me. That day could have broken me. Instead, it taught me something. Systems fail. People fail. But each of you can choose differently. Every time you greet a passenger, every time you make a decision, you can choose dignity over suspicion. The recruits listened intently, some nodding, some with tears in their eyes. For Noah, the moment wasn't about reliving trauma. It was about planting something new. Outside the academy, journalists asked if he felt vindicated. Noah paused before answering. It's not about vindication. It's about prevention. If even one kid sits down in first class and is treated with respect because of what we went through, then it mattered. Back home, Noah's sketches transformed. No longer airplanes with empty cabins, but blueprints of new designs, open seating models, equitable layouts. He began sharing them online. And to his surprise, engineers and architects responded. Some asked to collaborate. Others simply thanked him for imagining boldly. At night, he lay awake thinking about his future. Did he want to follow his father into technology or carve his own path in design, reshaping spaces so no one ever felt excluded again? He didn't know yet. But for the first time, the possibilities felt endless. Barrett Stone, meanwhile, faded into obscurity. His conviction, fines, and ruined reputation left him isolated. A former titan of entitlement reduced to a cautionary tale. Newspapers rarely mentioned his name except as a footnote to NorthStar's reforms. For Noah, that was enough. He didn't need revenge. He needed change, and change had come. One evening, Noah and Langston boarded a flight together, not private, not symbolic, just a simple trip. As they entered the cabin, the crew greeted them warmly by name. No hesitation, no suspicion. Noah felt the difference immediately, like stepping into air that was finally clear. They settled into their seats. The hum of the engines began. Noah looked out the window at the runway lights stretching into the night. His father leaned over. Does it feel different this time? Noah considered. Yes. But it's not just the flight. It's me. I feel different. Langston smiled. That's growth. Son, pain changed you, but you turned it into purpose. As the plane lifted into the sky, Noah thought of the journey, the fear, the humiliation, the trial, the whispers at school, the speeches, the reforms. All of it had carried him here to a moment of quiet where he could simply breathe and dream. And he understood something deeply. His story wasn't just about a seat. It was about every person who had ever been told they didn't belong, every quiet refusal, every act of dignity. The boy who once wondered if he mattered had become a young man who helped reshape an entire system. And as the clouds opened beneath him, Noah knew the sky itself felt wider. The story of Noah Ellington is not just about a seat on a plane. It's about the human right to be treated with dignity, no matter your age, race, or status. For older audiences who have lived through times of social change, the lesson resonates deeply. Progress often begins with small acts of courage. Noah did not raise his voice, nor did he seek conflict. He simply refused to accept injustice. That quiet act, backed by principle, exposed a system that had long gone unquestioned. From this story, we are reminded that dignity is not granted by wealth or position, but by the simple truth that every person deserves respect. And we see how the actions of one can ripple outward to reform institutions, inspire communities, and heal wounds across generations. In our daily lives, the lesson is simple yet profound. When faced with unfairness at work, in public, or even within our families, choosing to stand firm, even quietly, can light the path for others. The courage to say, "I belong here," can change not just your story, but the story of those who follow. Thank you so much for watching and sharing this journey with us. If this story moved you, please hit the like button, share it with others who need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage, justice, and hope.